Thank you. So welcome everybody. My name is Bill Holmstrom. I'm DLCD staff. I'm the agency's land use and transportation planning coordinator. We have a number of other folks here on the call that are staff. But let's go ahead and just real quick do introductions of folks maybe that aren't on staff, and I'll go ahead and just go down the boxes here and have people introduce themselves. Julie, then Steve.
Julie Warnicki, Transportation Planning Manager for the City of Salem.
Steve Kelly, Transportation Planner with Washington County.
Great, then it's James, then Emma.
Yeah, Jim McCauley, League of Oregon Cities. I'm the Legislative Director here.
Emma Newman, Senior Transportation Planner with the City of Springfield.
Great, then it's Carl, then Rob.
Hi, Carl McNair, Transportation Manager with the City of Medford.
And I'm Rob Innerfeld, Transportation Planning Manager with the City of Eugene.
Great, thank you for coming. Sasha, then Becky.
Hi, Sasha Vartanian, Lane County Transportation Planning.
Becky Taylor, Senior Transportation Planner for Lane County.
And we've got Wade, then Joseph.
My name is Wade Elliott. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director, City of Grants Pass.
Joseph Offit with the City of Hillsborough Transportation Systems Division. We do the transportation planning for the city.
Great, and then I'll just note that Brian Hurley is staff with ODOT joining us today. Let's see, we've got, I think Bob Courtwright is joining us by audio. We've got someone also by phone. Who's that on the phone? 541-255-5761.
Oh, that's Becky Taylor. I dialed in for audio.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. And then Bob, if you can introduce yourself. Bob, you're muted. There you go.
I'm sorry. I just got connected. So
okay,
yes, Bob
yeah.
Courtwright.
Okay, great. Thank
so
you. Sorry, you just got connected, and I'm like, hey, it's your turn. So sorry about that. So real quick, this is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Real quick introductions we just did. I'm going to talk just a few slides about some of the key issues that I think we want to focus on this work group. There's 4 other work groups that are working on other pieces of the rules, and kind of the scope of what we want to talk about in this meeting, and then hold some open discussion. And I've got a copy of the rules here that's marked with the rules that we potentially could talk about, and I don't know what people necessarily thought about this, what this would be about. So I'm happy, to have open discussion. So this is an informal meeting. We are, being streamed and recorded. So, be careful what you say. It's not that informal, but it's informal. It's not super structured to discuss ideas and concerns about the rules. We may schedule additional work group meetings if we need to. But time is getting tight, as folks know, and we'll try to schedule those if we feel it's necessary. This is just an hour long, but we'll see where we are at the end of the hour. We're talking about generally rules 100 through 210 in the current RAC 10 draft of the rules, and this gets a little. I'm sorry, but just to let people know, and in the rules in your packet, it does say in the description of the rules which work groups we expect to talk about each of the rules. So it does say that, but we're not talking about 102, which is having to do with Metro. We're not talking about 115 through 130, which has to do with engagement and equity. That's just kind of outside the scope of what we're going to talk about today. Although I think if people really want to talk about that, we probably could go down that road. I didn't in the packet say we're going to touch 140, 145, or 155. Those are kind of some random pieces that we're going to reorganize the rules a little bit so it makes a little bit more sense. But and then we're not talking about 170, which we're talking about in a different work group having to do with transportation performance standards. And that'll be, I'm not sure when it's scheduled. It's either later this week or next weck. So I'm frankly pretty been running from meeting to meeting. I can't keep track of what's coming up next. Like I said, we do expect to do some pretty significant renumbering in this section. It's evolved over time, and some of those evolutions made sense, and some of them didn't, and we kind of stuck some rules in places where maybe they don't make sense. So just so folks know, we do expect it to renumber and shift things around and potentially can kind of consolidate a few things. The modal planning, we do have another work group for that. That's the planning for the pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and street systems. We're gonna have a separate work group on those, and so there was interest in tackling those separately. So we're going to be doing that separately. Like I said, we expect to rearrange and renumber some of these rules. There's pieces of this that came over from existing transportation planning rules. We want to make sure that we didn't lose a lot of the key pieces of having to do with transportation system planning. But sometimes, I think we just need to go back and revisit with everything else that we've done since we've copied those over. If we need all the pieces of that, or they need to be together, if we can consolidate them or split them apart in different ways. And that's something in particular that I would say Matt Kroll and our staff has been working on and focused on. I don't think he's on our call today, but he's interested in kind of leading that renumbering and kind of refactoring for this part of the rules. So we can talk about that a little bit today if we want to, but I think maybe when we can talk more about substantive things today if we have the chance. But in general, we want the organization of the rules to make sense and be clear to people. And if people have ideas about that, we're happy to get input on that. So what are we trying to achieve here? We need updated transportation system plans at the local level that meet our climate and equity objectives. We need to make sure that when we're developing the plans and how the plans are implemented, that we're centering voices of underserved populations in making decisions, and that the outcomes of course of the rules help support our equitable outcomes, and that we're may have good outcomes for underserved populations in particular. We need to make sure that we're meeting targets for our climate pollution and VMT reduction. So our plans need to be structured and refocused in exactly that direction, so that we're making sure that we're working toward meeting those goals. That's critical in order to get where we're going. And a lot of piece of that is making sure that we're shifting our focus to other modes of travel. That, historically, we've spent a lot of time and effort in our transportation system on our streets and highways, and that's fine. We've built a really, world-class network of being able to drive around a car. That we did that. That's good. The rest of the modes of transportation need to catch up. We need to focus a lot on our pedestrian, bicycle, and transit networks, making sure those are world-class as well, that they're quality, that they're connected, that they're safe. And that's just a critical piece of what we want to do here. We want to make sure the rules are clear, that they're coordinated, that TSPs are coordinated with other plans that cities are doing, and the requirements in our rules. And frankly, we want to avoid unnecessary work. We're hearing this a lot from folks that, are we putting on extra requirements that aren't getting us toward our goal? We want to be focused on the goal. We want to get to where we're going. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we need to be laser focused. And to the extent that we need to cut out some fat, we're happy to talk about what that looks like. Real quick, I think, discussion topics that I think people are interested in. This is kind of what I thought, but, from just, feedback that we've heard, but absolutely open to other things. The timing of plan updates seems to be a big one, and how they actually will implement this in the future. We talk a little bit in Division 44 about how TSPs are going to be implementing scenario plans, and that primarily is the Eugene, Springfield, and Salem Kaiser areas in the next couple of years that we'll be focused on. The rest of the jurisdictions, we don't have a timeline set out for them about when a TSP update would happen right now in the rules. We've heard a lot about how that might be a desirable thing to happen. So I'm interested to hear about folks' concept about timing for plan updates. I know people are curious and want to talk about prioritization process, how projects or services or facilities are prioritized in the process of doing that in the TSPs. And then I think people may want to talk about project lists, both the illustrative and financially constrained project lists. So, and then other issues. So I think, unless people, I don't really, like I said, this is, I don't have a big structure for this. Are there key issues that other people really want to tackle kind of big picture that I didn't cover here? Steve.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words. I'm in the Portland metro area, so perspectives from here are maybe a little different than elsewhere in the state. But I have two major concerns. The first one has to do with the existing transportation planning rule as listed in section 10 sub 1. And that section says transportation planning shall be divided into two phases: transportation system planning and transportation project development. And in the metro area, the rules as crafted now take the section that refers to transportation project development and exclude it from the metro area. Section 050, section 50. And section 50 has the rules for how project development does not need to respond to the generalized location, need, mode, and function of that are identified on the transportation system plan. And the way you've crafted the rules in the metro area break that distinction between the two phases. So when a project is under project development, it could be subject to generalized need, mode, function, and location. So if somebody wants to put in a trail, they would need to respond to the general need, mode, function, and location. And then that would become this never-ending cycle of transportation planning, go back, okay, here's the project, go back, transportation planning, etc., as each one of those sort of works its way through the process. And I don't think you intended to break that distinction between those categories, but the way you've crafted it does that. And it's extremely concerning that you missed that point. And it needs to be, in order to have a discussion about transportation system planning and have transportation system plans that are meaningful in the metro area, that needs to be available as a distinction. I don't know how or why it would be, it was not included in that.
Yeah, I think I have to do a little bit more thinking and research about exactly what you're talking about, because Rule 10 is intended to continue to apply statewide. And
not 10, it's 50 that would not apply.
Okay.
So you break off 50 as not applying in the metro area and don't replace it. And so it needs to either replace it or keep it. 50 is just critical for every project.
Okay, that's good to know. That's the first I'm hearing of this particular issue. So
that's too bad, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to attend this meeting, because it's extremely concerning that you missed this.
Yeah, and that's thank you. We will, if you can follow up with an email to me, I would appreciate that.
I've been emailing our representative on the RAC, and unfortunately those get lost in all of the other conversations about parking and other attributes that are such major changes. But that one just breaks planning in the metro area, period.
Yeah.
They're no longer meaningful if you take that out.
Yeah, so just step back for a second. We are doing some different things in the Portland metropolitan area, just like we have been for decades, right? Because it's a different context up there in the Portland metropolitan area. If you have a regional planning authority that doesn't exist in the other metropolitan areas, so we recognize there's some differences there, and that's why we have that Rule 102 that we've shoehorned kind of in. We're going to renumber that. Yeah. We renumber everything, but that really is the rule where we're trying to put things that are different for Metro. And if this is a thing, and this is, even our conversations with Metro folks, this hasn't particularly come up. This hasn't come up. So I'm happy to
projects at Metro.
I'm sorry.
They don't. Metro doesn't implement.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, which is why. Yeah, this is good to have these meetings with the people, the locals. So, that might be a place where something like that could be replicated. Or we can figure out the best way of doing that, but I think I want to look into that a little bit more and see what our existing rules look like. And our intent is not to totally blow up the existing way of doing things. It's to build on the existing way of doing things, but shift it in ways to meet our objectives, right? Mm-hmm. So if this is something
that does not address climate equity or any of your other goals, it simply just totally changes how transportation planning in Oregon would need to occur. And I have another major question, and then I'll let other people talk, because I know this is a statewide thing and not a Oregon
and
metro
please
thing.
And Steve, I would just say please feel free to email me directly
I will
about with that particular concern. But what's your next concern?
The next, it's kind of a cross between a question and a concern. The way it's described in sections 180 through 210 now on the project prioritization is, and I really wanted to be sure I expressed that first one. So, but this one says it would be a prioritized project list. And to me, what I hear there when I read those words, I read that prioritized is a adjective that affects a list. And when I say think of a list, the definition of list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 475, whatever it is, right? Projects. And the word prioritized is not utilized in the current transportation planning rule as adopted today. And this adds 55 references. I did a search. How many times is it prioritized used in the new RAC 10? And it adds 55 references to prioritize, but doesn't define it. And I'm concerned about if the transportation system plan needs to have priorities ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 792, it's going to be very difficult to coordinate between multiple jurisdictions. I saw somebody from Joseph from Hillsborough on here, and their transportation plan might have different priorities than Washington County's transportation plan. We might have Project 10, which is their Project 2, and our Project 38 might be their Project 1. And I don't know how to coordinate funding of transportation improvements given ranked lists. I frankly have no idea how to do it. I can understand having something where it says, here's our high priorities, and it's the first 80 projects, and here's the second tier of projects, and it's a list of another 80 projects that are medium priority. But if it's a ranked list, I don't see any way to coordinate that process between Metro, the county, the cities, the ODOT, TriMet, Tualatin Hills Parks and Recreation District, etc. And so I think there needs to be a lot more work done on what is needed and meant by the word priority and by how the project list is required to be constructed. And I'll just leave it at that. It's mostly a question, but it's an extremely concerning question.
Yeah, and I think, it is our intent to, we're trying to set priorities. We're trying to say certain things are more important than other things, and we don't want to focus on low priority things ahead of things that we think are higher priority. I think, we're flexible about ways of making that happen. And I don't think we are specifically requiring 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could have tiers or something like that. I think potentially. I don't think we specifically say that you have to do that, but we're not clear about that either. And maybe we could do something like that and say that, you know, however you want to do it would be fine with us. But I think that's also something we want to think about. What are the outcomes of that in terms of, are we really going to make sure, you know, is the top tier then going to have the top, you know, projects, and the one that's at the bottom of the top tier is the one that goes through, or something. I don't know, maybe that's fine. Yeah, I think I'm happy to have more discussion around that, but I also
If I
want to make
may
sure that we
add,
hear.
I don't
Yeah.
understand how the prioritization is necessary in the transportation system plan is necessarily related to equity or climate change. I understand that our priorities, those are our priorities expressed in this effort, but the project prioritization is implementing the plan. And if the plan has those priorities and focuses on those priorities to begin with, I don't understand how the prioritization requirements are helpful for implementing things that already do that. But that's a different story. Really, I want more definition about what is meant by a prioritized project list in order to be able to respond to what these requirements say.
Okay. Thank you for that. Becky.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a high level question because it really determines how I understand which of these changes apply directly to Lane County. I'm seeing a lot of inconsistent language defining the urban area, the MPO boundary. So, for example, the change that I'm most concerned with is at 00152 about counties preparing regional TSPs, and the amendment strikes the MPO from being required to prepare a regional TSP. And I understand the rationale about how that's been inefficient in the past because the MPOs have to prepare an RTP for federal requirements. But when I'm looking at what does that mean to Lane County, are there additional things that we need to incorporate in our regional plan specific to the MPO area? When I look at all of the checklists for the jurisdiction, like the Eugene-Springfield metro area, it says counties within the Eugene-Springfield metro area, counties in UGB of cities in the metro area. So I'm just trying to understand, it might not be that much of a impact to Lane County if most of the changes are tied to in UGB of cities in MPO area. So for Central Lane MPO, that's managed by Lane Council of Governments, not Lane County. And then the cities of Eugene and Springfield, they create TSPs to their UGBs. Lane County co-adopts those TSPs for applicability for the unincorporated area within the UGBs. But our MPO also includes areas outside of the urban growth boundaries, and it also includes Coburg. And so I'm trying to understand how these rules apply to Lane County outside of the Eugene Springfield urban growth boundaries.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So by and large, the rules apply within urban growth boundaries. Therefore, urban transportation system planning. And we expect that counties outside of urban growth boundaries in rural parts of the county will continue to plan like they do now. And that's the intention of the changes that we made to Rule 15 is really just taking that MPO, the regional transportation system plan that a county does, and this would be, you know, all 36 counties in the state, is really to plan for the regional intercity transportation network within the county. So, you know, how do people from Florence get to Eugene? You know, things like that. And it's a different thing really than what we were asking metropolitan areas to do with the RTSP. It's a little confusing, but that's the way the rule's written right now. It's been that way for decades. So we're trying to change as little as possible as to nothing. We're not trying to change anything for folks that are outside of metropolitan areas. So these rules apply within the urban growth boundaries of cities within metropolitan areas. That means there are places that are rural outside of UGB that are still inside the metropolitan area. as far as we're concerned, as the state, that those are rural places, and they should be planned by the county as a rural place. That shouldn't change. I
Thank
think
you. That's
Carl,
a huge.
absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah, Carl.
Thank you. I just want to say, Steve was talking about the prioritization. I would echo that tiers, they make a lot more sense to me, because no plan is perfect. And as we get into implementing these things, having some flexibility, I understand that wanting priorities, but having some flexibility is important. It allows you to adjust to what happens that you don't know about at the time the plan's put together. But my question is really on performance standards, and I get the move away from the vehicle. The way I read it, it looks like level of service or VC ratios can still be used as one, but we have to incorporate others. And I guess I'm just wondering if there are examples of methodologies out there that or established methodologies for any of those other things that we need to consider, and how are those going to be developed as part of this rule, or is that going to be left up to individual places to determine?
So yeah, for your first point, thank you for that. And I think, we can have some discussion about tiers versus ranking, and I think that makes sense. To your second point, we do have another separate work group that's just going to be looking at Rule 170. That's just going to be looking at the transportation performance standards. So I don't want to talk about it too much today, just because I want to save time to talk about everything else. So I hate to kind of push you off that way, but if we have time at the end of this meeting to get back into that, I'm happy to have more discussion with you about that if you'd like. But we are having a separate meeting, and hopefully one of my staff can put the time and information in the chat about that, because I don't have that at my fingertips. Thank you, guys. Julie.
Thank you. So a couple things. One, just to this whole issue of individual versus ranked, I will point out that in section 200 sub 4, it says each project on the illustrative project list must be individually ranked. And so I think that's what leads people to thinking that that's what you mean, which I think is totally, in my mind, unreasonable. So I have, I guess, two issues, and they both relate to modeling and how we determine, BMT reduction. So so in section 160, sub 2, A and B, and this is sort of a minor thing. This is the reference to modeling, including latent and induced travel of additional roadway capacity. I've already commented on this, but I have not received any response. Our region is very concerned with that being there, because we're using the best, basically the best available model tools. And, it's arguable whether or not it includes latent and induced travel of additional roadway capacity. And so we would like that just to be removed. I don't think it needs to be in the rule. I mean, I think if you were doing guidance of what's the best management practices, or whatever you want to call it, for modeling. So that's one thing. And then I guess more specific to the selection of projects for the for the financially constrained list, it talks about you have to determine, if your list meets these certain outcomes, including, I believe, reducing your vehicle miles traveled. And if it doesn't, you have to take off a project and put on another project to get there. And that makes it sound like there's a nice, simple little box that we can just sort of like yank out one, roadway project, put in another project, and, things will change. Our models are not that sensitive, and, at least what we have. And so I'm concerned about that language. Also, there is the requirement for modeling doing two different projections, one with your illustrative list and one with your financially constrained list. And I want to know who's doing that. We don't operate a model at the City of Salem, and we are the big city in our area. It's operated by the Council of Governments through its SCATs, and they don't have a model of of your illustrative list is probably 5 times the length of the list that they have in the model today. So are we expecting is somebody going to be paying, the Council of Governments to develop and expand the model? Anyway, so I have big concerns about that language. Don't know what the answer is. So I guess I'll stop there.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different points there, and I don't know, Cody, are you able to address some of those at least? I think this gets more into your wheelhouse.
Sure. Did you want feedback on both of those, or I think there was kind of 3 of those there? Did you want me to respond to all 3 of them?
So I think there was a point, first of all, about induced demand and what the requirements are for looking at that. I think the second thing was about the process for how you put together the financially constrained list, which I guess I can talk about real quick here. And then the third thing was about the model's ability to handle both the illustrative and financially constrained lists and to consume those and think about whether or not they're going to meet VMT targets or not. So that second point, Julie, real quick, I'll just say, I think we're open to, I think that process that we outlined in what's that 210 sub 2 is probably maybe a bit too prescriptive, and we probably could add some flexibility there for how that works. And we're open to changes there. And I think that'd be fine. And maybe we just need to just say, come put together a financially constrained project that works. I don't know how to best to do that, but we want to make sure that, we're putting together a financially constrained list that is taking the top, as much as the top of the illustrative list as we can. That's what we're trying to get at there. Now, whether or not it does that, and it's the best way of doing that, I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, in my mind, that doesn't have to be, you don't have to spell out every little thing.
Yeah.
And it's sub 3, I guess, that I'm looking at it.
Okay.
The list cannot.
Yeah, it's 3. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, we'll change that a little bit. But Cody, if you could address those first and third points, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, just kind of considering latent and induced demand, we feel it's important, and that's where the state of the practice is headed. I would say that we're not telling you specifically how you need to account for that. So there is just some, at the very basic level, there are national level tools that you can use, very simple elasticity of demand models that's built on, empirical evidence from across the country. Something like that potentially be acceptable. We're also working with other agencies on the Oregon Model Steering Committee to kind of up the game of some of the modeling tools in the state, specifically in response to these rules and, climate work going forward. So really feel that there'll be some support there for you. We're not walking away from this.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get that that's best management practice and that, or best tools available, but I don't see why that needs to be called out in rule, because then somebody can then come in and argue, well, you didn't do it right, and so anyway, I just think it's being too specific. I think your guidance could definitely talk about that.
Okay. I mean, we'll consider that. I just, the rub on that is that when we put things in guidance, then we don't see it happening. So there's certainly a fine line of how we can get things going.
Well, if you're not walking away from it and the model steering committee is still working on it, I think the effort will continue. Anyway, that's
okay. Fair enough. Let's see. The other thing was talking about projecting the project lists. That is something that we've definitely heard a lot on, and we know that we've gotten 2 tracks here. One is saying you can do a projection on your illustrative project list as a city if you want to, or you can work together regionally. We really feel like it works better regionally. In the metro area, this would be basically accounted for by Metro and the work that they're doing already to comply with this the rules that have been there to make findings for the locals. So it's kind of handled differently up there. Again, we are working with ODOT closely on supporting implementation of the rules. You saw something in your packet there talking about the modeling capabilities. And as I mentioned, we're working with the modelers and folks from around the state to kind of make sure that we've got the tools to use there. And that would include, when you're developing your local TSP, you're using that regional model, right? That modeling tool is there and available for you.
Somebody has to do the work. I mean, and so does that mean that the state's going to pay, SCATs to do this work on behalf of all the cities to meet these state requirements? Or are you going to be looking to the cities to pay SCATs? I mean, SCATs definitely works. We work with them on, collaboratively on things we're doing, but at a certain point, there's a certain amount that they can help us without a separate contract. But
sure, I'll just say that, the existing way we do this in the state is that we usually pay a consultant to use that regional model to develop a TSP, right? Somebody is running a modeling tool in the development of a TSP. Clearly, we are changing the way we want to do business on developing a TSP. But I think that we expect that the state maintains its commitment to helping develop TSPs for the local governments. And whether that is paying SCATs, paying a consultant, we're working on implementation and funding to support the rules. So I think that we're not expecting that would just be a city responsibility, just like we don't expect that it's a city responsibility now. It's a shared responsibility.
Okay, the rules are written for city requirements on cities and on jurisdictions. So I'll shut up, let all the other hands speak.
Well, thank you for your input on that. And please, if you do have specific recommendations of how that could work better to get the intended outcomes of the rule, please do share those.
Emma.
Thank you. I appreciate all of the comments and perspectives being shared so far. I'd like to echo the support for tiers and flexibility and prioritization of projects within the TSP. I think about not only the comments that were shared, but the on-the-ground reality as a transportation planner trying to seek funding for projects. If I was constrained to, I can only seek grant funding for project number 1, and until that comes through, then I can't move on to 2. Say project 1 is $12 million, but project 2 is $50,000. There's grant opportunities that are right-sized to different opportunities. We don't want to say, don't do the sidewalk infill until you do the multimodal boulevard that is number 1, perhaps. So I think that's really important to incorporate more flexibility there. I really appreciate.
Yeah, just to be real clear. Once a project's in a financially constrained list, any project on that list can be completed. Those are all okay to move forward into development. So once I guess I don't even know that we need to prioritize the financially constrained list, frankly. Everything that's on that financially constrained list could be done.
That is so great to hear, and I think there needs to be amendments in the proposed rules to reflect what you just said. The second topic is I really appreciate my colleagues at Lane County being here and Becky's question, trying to understand how does this all apply to counties. And I just want to say, we support the removal of the requirement for an RTSP and also appreciate the clarification of how this applies to counties. During my whole career at Springfield, the RTSP has been another layer of planning that hasn't been useful or functional. So I think removing that is really great. And then you had asked at the beginning for topics, one including the timing around TSP updates. And again, I want to echo the need for flexibility on this. It should really be driven by the need to update a plan. Just having a requirement to update a plan because, here we are in the next number of year cycle is not the most strategic way to do it. Especially in smaller communities. I think Springfield's kind of mid-sized for our state. the more that we're doing a big TSP update project, the less that we're applying for grants and actually designing, building, doing community engagement to build the bike paths, to build the sidewalk infill, to put in transit. So it is a trade-off because of the staffing capacities, and I would hate to see so much planning that we're stuck in a planning cycle and we're not able to produce the actual tangible results in physical reality that impact an individual's ability to get to and from destinations, walking, biking, transit in the ways that we'd like to encourage. So I think that flexibility is important from that perspective, as well as being able to coordinate with work programs more broadly. Seems like if it's too prescriptive with the rules from the state, then we can't look at the local work program and say, what makes sense? How have we engaged the community in conversation? What's a logical sequence? How do we tie the land use planning to the transportation planning? So I know that you're hearing a lot of support and pressure for urgency with this, but I think that flexibility with the TSP update timing is important for those reasons.
Yeah, thank you. I think what we've heard consistently from local governments is that, every place is different. There are different ages of TSPs, different priorities, things that are happening, other existing projects that are going on, and things that we're putting on you, and it really isn't a date that makes a lot of sense in a lot of cases for TSP updates or for a lot of other pieces that we're talking about. So that's kind of think the way we're going. But I think, like you said, we're also hearing that, and we know that we need to make urgent action. So things need to happen soon, and we can't keep punting on a lot of these things. So trying to provide flexibility but also make things happen quickly is an interesting challenge, and we're trying to find that balance. Sarah.
Sorry, I was just going to say that makes sense, and I hope that the guiding principle is starting with the question, what are the barriers that local jurisdictions are facing to implementing robust walking, biking, transit facilities? Because I feel like we haven't really had that conversation at the RAC. It's been, let's apply more regulations as opposed to looking at what are the barriers right now? Because a lot of jurisdictions are trying to do a lot of good, and I'd like to focus on what the real problem is, as opposed to focusing on requirements that may or may not address the actual barriers to implementation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. And we're happy to continue to have discussions on that. I think moving forward, yeah, probably more than just this meeting, that's for sure. Sarah.
Thanks. And I know this is super tricky, and I work for a nonprofit. I am not a planner on staff, so I totally appreciate that the experience of trying to implement all this is not something I can relate to closely, but I just really want to underline the need for urgent change. And I appreciate the tension that staff are trying to serve, the DLCD staff are trying to serve here. We have an enormous need to change the status quo, and we need to find the money and the capacity to do that. And I just want to say, advocates out here in the world of climate and social justice are ready and enthusiastic to advocate for this shift in funding. And we really want to see a real shift in intention. And I'm just hungry to see that in these rules, but I also want to see them be implemented, in a way that's practical. And I just, in response to what I'm hearing, I would argue there is a need to update all the TSPs, because these existing plans that we have, including ones that have just recently been adopted, they don't get us where we need to go. We are not changing the status quo fast enough. We need to revisit this. So there is a driving need to update them. Understanding that that's also really difficult to do, I would just argue that there is that need. And just to go back to one of the barriers that we have to implementing walking and biking and transit infrastructure is that as a state, as counties and cities and a country, we continue to invest in making it easier and easier to drive. That is the barrier to good walking, biking, and transit. We have to keep doing all of this walking and biking and transit infrastructure to protect that infrastructure from all the driving and preserve it. So we need to be making a big shift away from investing in making it easier to drive. And that is a really difficult shift politically, and I understand that, but we have to do that, and that has to be part of this. So to keep just investing in biking, walking, and transit is great, but that will not get us where we need to go. And then just wrapping up on sort of the induced demand issue, we have to be measuring the changes in the use of all the modes in response to these investments because of what I was just talking about. If we make it easier to drive, more driving will happen. If we make it easier to walk, more walking will happen. If we make it easier to bike, more biking will happen. And we have to be measuring that and planning accordingly. So I think it's super important. Again, honoring that the details of this are really tricky, and I'm not the one who has to implement them every day. So I understand that's really difficult, but I just really want to underline it's super important, and we cannot keep going with the status quo. So thank you for the opportunity to soapbox a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah, Joseph.
Hi, this is Joseph Off with the city of Hillsborough. I wanted to comment on section 155. I made these comments several months ago to DLCD, and I don't think they got incorporated. It didn't appear when I read through their most recent revisions, they didn't get incorporated. The section 155 is basically requesting that we do measure vehicle miles traveled per capita for land use decisions. And land use decisions is a very broad word. And I really feel like the intention of this rule should be more for major transportation system plan amendments. When I'm thinking of land use decisions, I'm thinking of conditional uses or development review applications. And those should already be incorporated into the travel demand models that we're using. Those are, pretty much allowed uses. Those uses are already in the model. And so we shouldn't be having to reevaluate those uses again through that effort. And so it's putting more work on the jurisdictions. It's where a jurisdiction that relies on Metro for modeling. Metro is very swamped with having to do a lot of modeling. I mean, having us to go back or having consultant or applicant doing that work, it's a lot of resource to do. And it's pretty much going to come out with little to no change at all for vehicle miles travel. So I really recommend DLCD look at rewriting this rule just so it clarifies that it's regarding major transportation system plan amendments and not associated with things just as development review applications.
Thanks, Joseph. And we did note that from our conversation with you earlier. So that's cataloged there. We didn't miss that. I just want to clarify, and not to push back on that, but it does say a land use decision that relies on the transportation modeling or analysis shall do so. So it's not every land use decision, like a conditional use, but if you're relying on that, and you can still totally have your beef with it. I just wanted to point out that was the.
And that's still my concern. It's that when you're saying modeling or analysis, like we do have a development comes in, and if it's a very large scale now, we may have them do an analysis of bond capacity ratio, which is different than a travel demand model, which is on a macro level. We're dealing with instead of doing a macro level analysis, we're doing deterministic level analysis, and so those are two different things. But the rule is so general that it opens up that even if we require them to do a deterministic level analysis, just like synchro, that forces us to then have to comply with this rule. And that's why I just, instead of just saying that whenever modeling is triggering that, I'd rather just leave it saying it's major TSP amendments, not and have that be what instigates this section of the rule.
Okay, thanks for that.
Bob.
Thanks. I want to echo the comments that you heard from Sarah and to emphasize that we really make changes to transportation system plans. The existing plans that we have take us in the wrong direction. They won't get us where we need to go. The other thing I'd point out is we're spending currently tons of money updating TSPs. So let's not pretend that this is something new that we have to do. It's something that we regularly do. The question is, are we going to continue with business as usual that facilitates continued reliance on the automobile, or are we going to shift and do planning for the extensive alternative modes of supporting development in compact mixed-use areas that we've been talking about for 30 years? So I think we know what we need to do. That is, OEC and Thousand Friends have provided a number of specific suggestions. I'm interested in hearing the department's response to those. That would require a 2-year deadline for preparing TSP updates, that we have local governments adopt POP and employment allocations to guide subsequent plan updates, including RTPs that are ongoing in each of our metropolitan areas. So those are two really important things. The other thing that I wanted to jump in on is the financially constrained plan requirement, is requiring that an illustrative list that includes 5 times as many projects as are in the financially constrained list meet a VMT target is meaningless. Again, those aren't really there. And similarly, a financially constrained list where you can build anything that's on the list, regardless of priority, simply doesn't move us in the direction of implementing the things that are important. We think we need to have a financially constrained short-term list that reduces VMT. Again, these are specific suggestions that OEC and Thousand Friends have put in the record. We'd be very interested in hearing the department's response to those. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. So I think, you had a couple of points. One about, I think, the timing of plans. I think we've heard a lot of discussion about this back and forth, and we're in a difficult spot, right? Where, we're trying to deal with the reality on the ground of a lot of different jurisdictions that are in different places, that have different plans, that are willing to do the right thing. But the question is, how do we actually, if they don't have enough planners to actually do it, make it happen? And I think 2 years is universally probably not going to be able to fly. The state doesn't, it sounds like the state will probably have some additional resources, but I don't know if it's going to be on that time frame. So, but again, I think we hear the call for urgency, which is necessary. Everyone agrees that the sooner we can do it, the better. But if we just don't have enough money or bodies to actually do the work, I mean, I think about TriMet, right? They just cut 9% of their service, right, because they don't have enough drivers. It's not that they don't want to run the buses on the street. It's because they physically don't have enough people to drive the bus, and that, I think, is what we're hearing from local governments, is that just not enough people to do the planning. And so that's the tricky part of this, is to we started off with saying everything had to be done next year, basically, and that came back as that's not going to fly. So we're going back and forth between trying to figure out how to make that work, and I think that's difficult. Absolutely. The other point I think you were making was about the financially constrained list. And I think this is something where I think we've had discussions with you about this a number of times, and maybe, I don't know if Cody, you want to chime in here or not, but my understanding is that it's just not feasible realistically. You can't do enough. There's not enough money to do enough good projects to actually meet the VMT target in the financially constrained list. That you just can't do it. So to set that as a target is impossible. Short of substantial increases in investment from state or federal levels in doing good projects, and ideally that would be happening, but we're just not at that point right now. We have to be reasonable in what the financing is. So we're trying to get to a place where we're focusing on doing the good projects and doing them quickly, and we're happy to make some tweaks to how that process works. But I don't know, Cody, if you wanted to add anything to that, or if I caught everything.
I think you got it right. I just want to interject maybe a process check here, is that it's 11:54. Really great discussion. Want to keep it going, but folks might also have lunchtime engagements or tummies rumbling. Do we want to talk about maybe just next steps, maybe continuing this discussion and then getting to Julie and Steve real quick?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just curious, do people feel like this was valuable and would like to have a second meeting? In general, you can do your thumbs up or on your Zoom if you think you want to do that, or I'm only seeing a couple thumbs up.
I'd be curious to hear how the performance standards and modal planning work groups go, because I feel like this correlates with those, and maybe some of the discussion that needs to happen might happen in those work groups.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point too. I think we'll probably plan to see if we can schedule another one. The problem is the calendar is not working in our favor right now. We would probably be around the holidays sometime. It would be in late December if we have another one of these. So that might be tricky for people, and that's totally understand. But that's really the time frame that I think we're looking at, and so we'll work with staff on seeing about doing that. And of course, if we only have a few people show up, that's okay. That's fine. I don't expect to have all 23 people back. Julie.
I wanted to touch on the timeline. in the page where you sort of detailed out what you thought the timelines were for Salem Kaiser, and I think this was also for Eugene Springfield, it said transportation system plan when updating the TSP no later than December 31st, 2024. So that was the first time I had seen that date. I'm not exactly sure where in the rule that is currently specified. You know, as you know, the city of Salem is thinking about embarking on a TSP update right now. And if, assuming we go forward with that, which we're not sure, we might meet that target, but that's just starting now. I mean, it takes a lot of time to do that. And that seems very aggressive for me. The other thing.
So real quick on that, I'll just answer that real quick, is that I believe that requirement's in Division 44. And that can be adjusted through the work plan option that's already available in the draft Division 44. And that's why it's in Salem, Kaiser, and Eugene Springfield, but not other places.
Okay, I don't remember seeing that, but okay. And then I guess the other thing in terms of the TSP requirements, this ties a little bit into the climate-friendly areas, but the climate-friendly areas require that you comply with sections of the TSP requirements. So by June 30th of 2024. So that to me, you know, you're sort of linking in and you're sort of pulling in the TSP into that section. And then that comes along with everything else that you need to do. So I don't think that's captured in your analysis of your timelines.
Yeah, no, I think that the idea there was that climate-friendly areas will be planned in the way that's consistent with the requirements in those modal planning sections in 500, 600, 700 in particular. Yeah, but the timing, I think, to start off with, I mean, we're trying to build these rules that will last for a while, but there's the difference between what happens at the beginning and then what happens kind of continuing, and I think that's kind of one of those places where when you're first designating a CFA, that doesn't really make sense if you haven't updated your TSP yet, which most places will not have had updated TSPs that meet those requirements. So I think we'll revisit that language in the CFA, and there's a whole nother climate-friendly areas and land use work group that's going to be meeting later this week as well. But we'll revisit that and make a little bit more sense. But we've heard that before too.
Okay, and then just really quickly, I'm assuming that if you have a project that's on your illustrative list, not in your financially included, and a development comes along that you were maybe not anticipating, that you would still be able to require that development to do whatever the project is, the frontage, the whatever. It's not on the included list. You're not putting city funds towards it, but I would assume that you would still be able to do that. And I just want to make sure that that's a correct assumption.
I believe it would require a TSP amendment to do that because the only planned projects in the TSP are what's the financially constrained list.
So you would not be able to require a developer to do a frontage improvement because they happen to be developing up on Croissant Mountain and you weren't sure, you know, that's a pretty big issue.
Yeah.
Right now in our plan, when we have tiers, part of the, like, for example, a low priority project is tied to our assumptions about when development's going to happen in that area. Development surprises us sometimes and happens sooner. And I would not want us to have to do a TSP amendment in order to require a development to do something that, you know, otherwise we'll be left with a facility that's unimproved.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think our concern would be, you know, making sure it's not an end around for the financially constrained list.
You know, you got to put trust in local governments too, you know?
Yeah. But I hear your point, and I think we can, I don't know that the rule is clear about that right now. That's probably why you're asking the question. So I think thank you for that, and we'll make a note of that. Because I think my idea had been that we would just rely on the financially constrained list, but I see what you're saying. There's projects that kind of come from development there. It's noon. There's a few people I think with hands still up. I'm going to let people go. Please go have lunch. Enjoy your time. Thank you for coming. We're going to set another meeting. later this month probably. And I appreciate everyone's time and attention, and thank you for joining us. But I know, Rob, maybe you had a related comment. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just very briefly, and we can do this follow up in more detail, but we have an upon development section of our constraint list. I don't know if that would be a good tool if other jurisdictions use that, but it was sort of for those types of projects that the city wouldn't necessarily initiate on our own, but where developers would, where we could anticipate development happening. So that that might be a way to address Julie's concern. You know, I'd be happy for DLCD staff to look at the list in our TSP, and from a financial constraint perspective, my sense is that you guys haven't necessarily been like policing that in the past, but want to take a closer look moving forward, which I'm fine with. I think that's a reasonable approach. So thank you.
Yeah, just to be clear, that the present TPR does not require local TSPs to have a financially constrained project list. That's new.
Well, but the thing is that our MPO then says that they're constrained, and then we get this huge RTP list, and then advocates are like, "What are all these projects?" And it's the MPOs are acting as if they're financially constrained. We did a financial constraint for ours, but yeah, okay. That's...
And the federally required RTPs do have a financially constrained list. It's required under federal law, but I'm just saying that the state, this is new for the state to require this of a local TSP. But yeah, it has that effect in many places for sure. Steve.
Thank you. I just want to echo Julie's concern there with, we get roughly a third or more of our transportation improvements constructed by private development. And it wouldn't be an end around, it's implementing the plan. And I would argue that our plan is not your major impediment to climate friendly and equitable communities, at least in Washington County. But regardless of that, I think if, as you just mentioned, Bill, if we're setting rules for long term here, I think it's important to be very deliberate about the rules. And if it takes more time to get them right so that they work in the long term for our state, then it's important to take that time and do it the way we need to with everyone's input. I'm not saying we shouldn't hurry up and do our planning. I think the county has been proactive in doing that, but even if we, for other reasons, haven't been or haven't been enough, the getting the rules right for the long term is critical. What I'd like to see is sort of a comprehensive consideration of how these would work in practice from other examples, either elsewhere in the country or whatever case studies that you would like to utilize in Oregon or elsewhere, that sort of demonstrate to us how we would go about doing it. And that would form sort of the background and basis of a guidebook of how you envision these rules working together so that we have coordinated planning between the multiple jurisdictions and municipalities throughout Oregon. I think having those sorts of case studies would really sort of clarify what we're doing and what's proposed here. And taking our time and getting this right is really important. For example, I missed that development wouldn't be required to build the stuff on the illustrative list. And that could be massive amounts of transportation infrastructure that just frontages that wouldn't get built, sidewalks, bike lanes, curb gutter drainage and environmental concerns that would not get built because of just, we didn't think of that. This is important to get right. And with that, I recognize the time, and I've spent more than my share talking, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I will just note that our time frame for the rulemaking has been given to us, to the staff, by our commission. The commission has, based on the comments that they heard from similar concerns that you've given, they've extended the timeline already. You know, folks are free to talk with our commission in February about this, but I'll be honest, the sense that staff gets is that our commission wanted this done yesterday. So
yeah, our county's written a letter to that respect. So
yeah, I mean, but it's not me that's saying like let's do this by, but it's our staff and it's our commission and the management of the agency, which is very keen to get this done soon.
Understanding that, Bill, then just do the parts that are the minor amendments that you need to do within that time frame. Don't try to tackle these long-term rules without really thinking it through. This is huge, and so it's up to staff to say what's reasonable here. And that's, I understand that you're being the directive, but I think it's really important that you respond with the approach of what you can do.
Thank you for that. I think we're dealing with. Thank you for that comment. You're not alone in that comment. I don't think and we're trying to walk a fine line here. I appreciate that. Thank you, Emma.
Appreciate the challenge. Appreciate getting the lunch. This is a huge red flag about the TSP amendment piece that has just recently been brought up. I just wanted to share a tangible example in Springfield. I think right now there's a multi-unit development that's building a lot of housing kind of midway east-west in Springfield, which is an east-west oriented community. And because of our TSP illustrative project, they're going to be building part of a multi-use path that is critical to north-south bike network and pedestrian network connectivity throughout our whole community. And so if we had to delay by requiring a TSP amendment, then that has huge equity concerns. If we can't be building housing as quickly at the rate that we need to, that means people who are being displaced by the holiday farm fire are living on the streets longer. It means that there's just a lot of different pieces that delay is not okay to then require the multi-use path infrastructure that's planned out. So I really hope that this gets some more attention and gets resolved.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. I think this is something we'll fix. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah. I think you want to. You will have to balance that flexibility with making sure that we're allowing good projects to go through. But I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do that. But I think I hear what you guys are saying, and I agree. So we'll figure something out.
Thanks. Have a great lunch.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.